Good evening, and welcome back to the Poe Museum. Since I imagine a few of you are horror fans, I'd like to ask you, what was Edgar Allan Poe's first horror story? Was it The Telltale Heart, The Black Cat, The Cask of Amontillado, or an early masterpiece of psychological terror, obsession, grave robbery, and amateur dentistry? We'll find out on tonight's installment of the Curator's Crypt. Well, here it is. This is the first printing of Berenice, a tale, from the March 1835 issue of the Southern Literary Messenger. When this came out, Poe was 26 years old. He'd been struggling to make it as a writer since he was 18 when he published his first book of poetry. And by this time, he'd published 3 books of poetry. None of them really made an impact. He was barely able to survive off of his writing, and he tried just about everything. He really wanted to be a poet, but short stories were what the magazines demanded. He had written his first short story probably when he was a teenager. We know of an early one he wrote when he was at the University of Virginia that he probably destroyed because everyone there made fun of it. There was a character named Gaffy, and everybody around campus started calling him Gaffy until Poe just got sick of it. So he wouldn't publish his first story until after he'd published those 3 volumes of poetry. And this isn't it. It was an early Gothic tale called Metzingerstein. And Gothic tales have been around since the time of Horace Walpole's Castle of Otranto back in the 1760s. And they were usually set long ago in a faraway kingdom. There was usually a haunted castle, a family curse, some ghosts, some supernatural elements. And Metzingerstein fits perfectly into that mold. We've got the haunted castle, the family curse, but it's not his best story. He published it in the Saturday Courier in 1832, so 3 years before Berenice. And a lot of people think that he was probably making fun of Gothic literature because it was kind of so over the top. You've got a horse ghost jumping out of a tapestry on the wall, and it's a little bit over the top. So after that, Poe tried a lot of different kind of things. Comedies, he wrote a lot of comedies and satire that's just not terribly funny by today's standards, and he even wrote a romance, The Assignation, tragedy. He wrote an adventure story, Manuscript Found in a Bottle, and that's the one that really first put him on the map when he won a literary contest with it. And one of the judges for that contest put Poe in contact with the owner of the Southern Literary Messenger, Thomas Willis White. And he's the one who offered to let Poe contribute some to the magazine, send in some book reviews or poetry or short stories. And Poe decided for some reason to publish Berenice. And for some reason, Thomas White printed it. He must not have read it. It's the story of a husband who explains to you that he's got a little bit of a one-track mind. He's a monomaniac in the terms of the day. And in Poe's time, there weren't a lot of words for different mental illnesses. There was melancholia, which we might call depression now. And that was caused by having too much bile. There was neuroses or nervousness that was caused by having too much blood. And there was mania or monomania, kleptomania. So when you're a monomaniac, that was the idea that you're obsessed with one thing. So this man saw his beautiful wife Berenice smile and became obsessed with her teeth. He could think of nothing else but her precious pearly white teeth. But then she wasted away and she was buried in the family cemetery. So naturally, this narrator of our story digs her up and rips out all of her teeth. The problem is, the twist ending, she wasn't really dead. They accidentally buried her alive. And she wasn't too happy about having her teeth extracted like that. Everyone in the house heard her screams. They rushed out to rescue her. By the time they got to her, she was toothless. And our narrator wakes up from his tooth-induced trance and realizes he's covered in mud and gore and has a little box on his table, which he instinctively knocks onto the floor, and out tumble 32 bloody white teeth, which means she still had her wisdom teeth. And this was a gruesome, disgusting story. Other magazines were saying this is injurious to the public morals. But it got attention. And whether you like the story or not, and even if you didn't like it, you knew that this author was something great, that he was onto something. But a good place to look for contemporary opinions of this story is in the magazine itself. This is the April 1835 issue of The Messenger. Now, this is an individual copy in the original wrappers, whereas this is a bound volume. At the end of the year, you could have your whole year's worth of magazine bound up into one big book. But since this retains the original covers, we can look on the inside back cover there. And we can read some of the notices of the story that were printed in other magazines. Here's a good one right at the bottom. The singular tale of Berenice by Edgar A. Poe develops much beauty and elegance of style, but is altogether too full of the wild, mysterious, horrible, and improbable. Not too bad. They just think it went a little bit too far. And in the front here, there's even another one that says, Poe's story is well written, very well written. Of course, one of Poe's own mentors, he didn't like it. Nathaniel Beverly Tucker wrote, "We cannot but think that such overwrought delineations of the passions are injurious to correct taste, however attractive they may be to the erratic mood and unnatural imaginings of a poetically vivid mind. Mr. Poe is capable of higher and more useful flights, and will no doubt reach an enviable eminence if it does not suffer to the current of his genius to be choked by a morbid sensibility or diverted from its natural channel by the destructive pressure of a superabundant fancy." So he's saying, yeah, get away from the dark stuff. Maybe write something a little bit lighter, a little bit happier. That's what people want to read. And that's maybe one of the criticisms Poe is getting. Even though he's on to something new, he was getting criticisms. This is disgusting. And you're writing about ripping out people's teeth. It's got a lot of blood and gore. It's in bad taste. And apparently, Mr. White back at the Messenger was getting a lot of angry letters sent to the magazines, and he started to hate the story himself. So he wrote to Poe and gave his thoughts on the story, that this is in bad taste. So Poe wrote him a letter back, which still survives, in which Poe explains what he was trying to do. And he's saying that it's not about good taste or bad taste. It's not about what impresses the critics. We're not looking at the critic score. We're looking at the audience score. We're not selling books here. Books are expensive. Not everybody can afford them. We're selling magazines to a mass audience. This is cheaper. This is ephemeral. So Poe justifies what he did. In his letter, he says, "A word or two in relation to Berenice. Your opinion of it is very just. The subject is by far too horrible, and I confess that I hesitated in sending it, especially as a specimen of my capabilities. The tale originated in a bet that I could produce nothing effective on a subject so singular, provided I treated it seriously." So what was this singular subject? This bizarre and unusual subject? Well, it was a big scandal up in Baltimore, made the newspapers, that dental students had been digging up corpses, robbing graves to steal the teeth to make dentures. And they got caught doing this. So I can imagine Poe sitting around some of his writers' friends and saying, "I bet you can't write a story about ripping out corpse teeth." So Poe took him on that bet, and that proves his story. But this is important. This shows that Poe isn't looking for inspiration in folklore and legends and witches and vampires. He's looking to the news. He's looking to the world around him, to contemporary events. And that's one of the big differences between this and the Gothic romances that came before him. He's not writing about something far away and long ago. He's writing in the here and now, in his here and now. And that's what really makes this a modern horror story. And also the fact that instead of the terror being driven by fear of the supernatural, The plot is driven forward by the psychology of the narrator, by his monomania. And that's what makes this a psychological terror story. So Poe's really innovating. He's really flipping the script here. But let's continue with the letter. But what I wish to say relates to the character of your magazine more than to any articles I may offer. And I beg you to believe that I have no intention of giving you advice, being fully confident that upon consideration you will agree with me. The history of all magazines shows plainly that those which have attained celebrity were indebted for it to articles similar in nature to Berenice, although I grant you far superior in style and execution. I say similar in nature. You ask me, in what does this nature consist? In the ludicrous heightened into the grotesque, the fearful colored into the horrible, the witty exaggerated into the burlesque, the singular wrought out into the strange and mystical. You may say, all this is in bad taste. I have my doubts about it. Nobody is more aware than I am that simplicity is a cant of the day, but take my word for it. No one cares anything about simplicity in their hearts. So Poe is saying this story will put your magazine on the map. He actually says in the same letter, to be appreciated, you must be read. So people are going to start reading this magazine. This is going to attract a national attention. And Poe knows what he's talking about. He's actually been writing for quite a while now. Even though he's 26 years old, he's been contributing to national magazines by this point. He's been winning literary contests. He knows what he's talking about. And Mr. White, even though he was the owner of the magazine, his experience was really as a printer. He started this magazine about a year earlier, and it was failing. Nobody was buying it. So maybe it's Poe's letter here. Maybe it's the buzz that's generating about this story. But he kept Poe on and let him continue to contribute. And it wasn't long before he offered Poe a job, let him start proofreading, and before you know it, Poe was editing. And he was contributing more wild and strange stories like King Pest or Morella. And you know what? Poe was right. In a year's time, increased the circulation of the magazine 7 times, made the most popular journal in the South, established himself with a national reputation, only got fired twice while he was there. But Poe was onto something. This was the new kind of horror. And by the time Poe wrote his first collection of short stories, which included Berenice, he included in the preface that this was something new. He was going to write what he called the pseudo-horror of Gothic literature, or Germanism as he called it, because he said that he tapped into the essential source of terror. Or in Poe's words, if in many of my productions terror has been the thesis, I maintain that terror is not of Germany, but of the soul. That I have deduced this terror only from its legitimate sources and urged it only to its legitimate results. So Poe realized he was onto something with these stories, and he reprinted Berenice, as I said, in his first collection of short stories, The Tales, the Grotesque and Arabesque, and reprinted it again 10 years later in 1845 in the Broadway Journal. But if you look at that printing, that's the final edited, authorized version. That's the version of the story that you're going to see in anthologies today. And with the benefit of hindsight, he's 36 years old by now. He can look back on what worked and what didn't work in the story. And he made the decision to cut out 4 paragraphs. But those 4 paragraphs are still here in the first printing. So why don't we read them and find out why he would have cut them out of the story. So Poe's describing going to Berenice's deathbed. He thinks she's dead. And he starts to approach the corpse. With a heart full of grief, yet reluctantly and oppressed with awe, I made my way to the bedchamber of the departed. The room was large and very dark, and at every step within its gloomy precincts, I encountered the paraphernalia of the grave. The coffin, so a menial told me, lay surrounded by the curtains of yonder bed. And in that coffin, he whisperingly assured me, was all that remained of Berenice. Who was it asked me, would I not look upon the corpse? I had seen the lips of no one move, Yet the question had been demanded, and the echo of the syllable still lingered in the room. It was impossible to refuse, and with a sense of suffocation I dragged myself to the side of the bed. Gently I uplifted the draperies of the curtains. As I let them fall, they descended upon my shoulders, and shutting me thus out from the living, enclosed me in the strictest communion with the deceased. The very atmosphere was redolent of death. The peculiar smell of the coffin sickened me, and I fancied a delirious odor was already exhaling from the body. I would have given worlds to escape, to fly from the pernicious influence of mortality, to breathe once again the pure air of the eternal heavens. But I had no longer the power to move. My knees tottered beneath me, and I remained rooted to the spot and gazing upon the frightful length of the rigid body as it laid outstretched in the dark coffin without a lid. God of heaven, is it possible? Is it my brain that reels? Or was it indeed the finger of the enshrouded dead that stirred in the white cerement that's bound it? Frozen with unutterable awe, I slowly raised my eyes to the countenance of the corpse. There had been a band around the jaws, but I know not how. It was broken asunder. The livid lips were wreathed into a species of smile. And through the enveloping gloom, once again there glared upon me in too palpable reality the white and glistening, the ghastly teeth of Berenice. I sprang convulsively from the bed, and uttering no word, rushed forth a maniac from that apartment of triple horror and mystery and death. So there's probably a few reasons Poe would have cut this out of the story. One of them is maybe the stench of decaying flesh was a bit much for his readers. Maybe he thought that was a bit too far. I can cut that part out. But also, this shows us that the narrator knows his wife's alive. He sees her smile. He intentionally buries her alive. Without those paragraphs, we don't really know that she's still alive until the twist ending where the husband wakes up and he knocks the box of teeth off because he's told, oh yeah, your wife is alive in the grave and she doesn't have any teeth. So while this does contribute to the foulness of the odor of the story, the atmosphere of it, it does kind of give away the ending. So maybe it's better that Poe cut this out. So what do you think? Was Poe right when he cut out the passage about the foul stench of decomposing flesh? Or should he have left it in? Let us know down in the comments. And don't forget to brush and floss and see your dentist, because you never know when somebody's going to bury you alive just to dig you up to rip out all of your teeth. And if you'd like to help us preserve precious Poe pieces, like the first printing of Poe's very first horror story, why not support the Poe Museum or become a member at poemuseum.org. And until next time, thanks for joining us, and I'll leave you with more gratuitous footage of the Poe Museum cats doing Poe Museum cat stuff.